Black Death, the plague that wiped out a third of Europe. In the mid-14th century, Europe faced one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, the Black Death. Sweeping across the continent from 1347 to 1351, this catastrophic plague killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people, nearly a third of Europe's population. It brought entire cities to their knees, reshaped societies, and left a lasting impact on the cultural, political, and economic fabric of medieval Europe. Origins of the Black Death. The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, originated in Central Asia, likely in the region of modern-day China or Mongolia. It spread westward along trade routes carried by merchants and soldiers, and arrived in Europe via the Silk Road and maritime routes. The first recorded instance of the plague reaching Europe occurred in October 1347, when Genoese trading ships docked in the Sicilian port of Messina, carrying not just goods but a deadly cargo: rats infested with plague-carrying fleas. The plague was primarily spread by these fleas, which lived on black rats common aboard ships and in urban areas. When an infected flea bit a human, it transmitted the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which causes the plague. There were three forms of the disease: the bubonic plague, the most common, causing swollen lymph nodes or buboes; the septicemic plague, affecting the bloodstream; and the pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs and was highly contagious. Pneumonic plague was the deadliest, often killing victims within days and spreading easily through respiratory droplets. The spread across Europe. The plague spread rapidly across Europe, facilitated by trade routes, military campaigns, and overcrowded cities. From Messina, the disease quickly moved through Italy, devastating cities like Florence and Venice. It spread northward into France, Spain, and England, and by 1348, it had reached the Holy Roman Empire, Scandinavia, and Russia. Medieval Europe was particularly vulnerable to the plague due to several factors. Cities were densely populated, and sanitation was poor, with streets often littered with waste and food scraps that attracted rats. Personal hygiene was also limited, and the concept of quarantine was not yet well understood. As a result, the disease spread unchecked, killing indiscriminately across all classes and regions. The symptoms and suffering victims of the plague often experienced a swift and agonizing death. The most recognizable symptom of the bubonic plague was the appearance of painful, swollen lymph nodes, called buboes, typically in the armpits, groin, or neck. These were accompanied by fever, chills, fatigue, and headaches. In more severe cases, the buboes could rupture, releasing pus and blood. In its pneumonic form, the plague infected the lungs, causing violent coughing, blood spitting, and rapid deterioration. Septicemic plague, though less common, attacked the bloodstream directly, leading to tissue necrosis and a high mortality rate. Death could occur within a matter of days or even hours, leaving victims and their families little time to react. For many, the disease was a terrifying mystery. People didn't understand the causes of the plague, and as death spread, fear and paranoia gripped towns and villages. With no effective medical treatments or understanding of bacteria, people turned to extreme measures to try to stop the plague. Doctors wore bird-like masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing the scents would protect them from miasmas, or bad air, which was thought to carry the disease. These efforts, however, were futile. Social and religious impact. The Black Death caused widespread social upheaval. Entire towns were wiped out, and the death toll was so high that burial grounds overflowed, forcing mass graves. The overwhelming loss of life led to a breakdown of social order in many areas. Farmers died in their fields, leaving crops to rot, while artisans, merchants, and clergy were struck down, causing economic paralysis and food shortages. Religion played a central role in medieval life, and the plague challenged the spiritual and religious beliefs of the time. Many people believed the Black Death was a form of divine punishment for sin, and they sought to atone by performing penance. Flagellant movements arose where groups of people publicly whipped themselves in the streets in an effort to seek God's mercy. Others turned against minority groups, particularly Jews, blaming them for causing the plague by poisoning wells. This resulted in violent pogroms, with Jewish communities being attacked, displaced, or killed in various parts of Europe. The failure of the church to protect the population from the plague led to widespread disillusionment with the clergy, many of whom fled from their congregations to save themselves. In contrast, some priests who stayed behind died in large numbers, particularly when administering last rites to the dying. This crisis of faith contributed to long-term changes in the religious landscape of Europe, the aftermath and economic impact. As the Black Death began to subside by 1351, the aftermath of the plague left Europe forever changed. The massive loss of life led to a severe labor shortage, which disrupted agriculture and trade. In many regions, serfdom, where peasants were tied to the land and obligated to serve a lord, began to decline as surviving workers could demand higher wages and better conditions due to their scarcity. This shift would eventually help to dismantle the feudal system that had dominated Europe for centuries. Additionally, the plague had a profound impact on European art and culture. Themes of death, despair, and pestilence became prevalent in artistic expression, with the danse macabre, dance of death, motif depicting skeletons leading the living to their graves, a reminder of the fragility of life. The devastation caused by the plague also contributed to the rise of new intellectual movements, including humanism and the Renaissance, which sought to emphasize human potential and creativity in the face of life's uncertainties. Long-term consequences. The Black Death was not just a one-time disaster, it recurred periodically throughout Europe for centuries. Subsequent outbreaks in the 14th through 17th centuries continued to kill millions. Though none as severe as the initial wave, each recurrence left its mark on society, contributing to population declines, shifts in economic power, and changing social structures. Over time, advancements in medicine, particularly during the Renaissance, began to improve understanding of diseases, and quarantine measures became more effective. The Great Plague pandemics of the Middle Ages eventually came to an end, but the lessons learned from the Black Death about the vulnerability of human societies to disease remained. Conclusion. The Black Death was a turning point in European history. It wiped out a third of the population, reshaping societies and economies, and leaving scars that would last for generations. The devastation it caused cannot be overstated, but it also paved the way for transformation, bringing about changes in labor systems, religious beliefs, and cultural expression. The story of the Black Death is one of both unimaginable loss and human resilience in the face of disaster, a reminder of how fragile yet adaptable societies can be in the wake of tragedy.